You are now listening to You Heard. In today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by Irene, who talks about the intersectionality of her identity and how her not fitting into her quote-unquote titles and labels forced her to create different communities for her to feel like she was at home. In today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by Irene. She is a part-time cancer patient and a full-time grad student and an old friend of mine from high school. I'm super excited to have you on the episode today. I remember us being in a lot of classes from high school, especially those art classes. Irene is an amazing artist, at least from the last time that I've seen her art, like 10 years ago. It's been such a long time. But Irene was always that girl in class who's just a little bit different. And, that differentness has really just played a role in why I appreciate her. I remember you being you would draw characters on your elbow, and I'd be like,
oh my gosh,
I feel
that's
that
so long ago.
it is and I remember being like, okay, I feel this energy, but it was high school was definitely different. And I know that when you and I were talking about this episode, you were talking about how who you were kind of wasn't fully embraced at that time, but now that we're older, I mentioned that you were ahead of your years. The kind of nerd that you were and the things that you were interested in, like K-pop and anime and stuff like that, all of a sudden everybody now is into that. And this is, pretty much a decade later. So you are into pop culture and what needs to be appreciated way ahead of everybody else before they started getting into it. So for anyone that doesn't know Irene, she's super cool, and I'm really looking forward to doing this episode with you.
Oh, thank you. That was a very flattering introduction. And would it be on brand for me to say that I'm actually drawing right now as we're speaking?
Completely on brand. I am not surprised.
It's very helpful. Part of the reason, other than having a creative outlet through drawing, another reason why I enjoy drawing is because it helps ground me to the moment. I would even be drawing in class, and I even draw in class now in grad school because it's it's hard for me to just listen to a lecture and not do something every single moment. And drawing since elementary school has always helped ground me to the moment because I don't put 100% of my attention into my drawing. If I did, then I'd save it till later. But it just helps me stay creative in that moment and keeps me on my toes. Even if, let's say, there are parts of a lecture, and this always happens, where lectures get dull.
Yeah.
Or something. So it really just helps me stay present. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. I know that I definitely struggle with staying present. There's so many different kinds of ways that people suggest to try to get into that and be grounded in the moment. As you said, I think that's a great way of putting it, like meditation and stuff. And none of those things necessarily work for me, but maybe I should draw. I've always loved drawing and I always loved doing art. So maybe that is a tool that I will use. So I will let you know how it works for me in the future. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Totally. We can do an art trade in the future.
Hey, I'm totally down. I'm so here for that. That would be really cool. But I want to open the floor for you to let's dive in. I know that you wanted to catch up a little bit, and we definitely have a jam-packed episode today that I'm really looking forward to sharing with the audience. So I'm going to give you the floor and we can go ahead and start.
Yeah. So as we kind of finagled together, I thought the best use of my time here is to speak about my experience with my identity and what identity means to me and the ways in which I utilize that identity for both myself and for other people through community building. So,
yes.
Firstly, I define myself as a Filipino American, specifically a Filipino New Yorker, and also a cancer patient. So two different things. Both of them are facets of my identity that I was thrust into, one at birth and one through circumstance in the last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all the same in that, there was a process of recognizing the choice that it's something that I can choose to embrace. And, there also being the other side of that choice of rejecting that in whatever way, but ultimately I chose to embrace it and chose to define the ways in which I embrace it as well, which took
Right.
honestly, like in college, I was pre-med and psych major, but really the most impactful class that I took was my Asian American Studies class that centered on identity, and reading about these authors as well as listening to the experiences of my classmates helped me feel that I'm not alone in experiencing this sort of middle ground and like, not, I wouldn't say battle, but really that tension between the identity that I've been given and the one that I've chosen to embrace. So I've learned that we'll dive deeper into these as we keep talking, but I've learned to define identity as a whole is the communion of how I'm perceived by other people, as well as the way that I perceive myself. I believe that an even grounding of both of those things is necessary to define who you are. And that's just me. Like people, I feel very in awe of people who are able to define their identity solely on their perception of themselves. That's very challenging for me to do, but I admire people all the same who are able to be that sort of real novel originator. But for me, I find that the communion of those two things, of the way that I'm perceived and the way that I perceive myself, really to be the best ground for myself, at least in this present stage of my life.
I get that. Yeah, definitely. I think for me, when it comes to identity, I think we're always told not to allow other people define the way that you see yourself and create your narrative for you, etc. But as I've gotten older, in this kind of like journey of like loving myself, accepting myself, forgiving myself for not being perfect all the time, I have had to rely on the way in which my loved ones see me, at least in the positive aspects, of course. So like my friends that I'm really close with, that I pretty much consider family, or my mom or my partner, and the way in which they talk about me, they describe me, they address me, the way they embrace me is a constant reminder of what I bring to the table and who I am. And I think a lot of what other people see and in me and love about me, I struggle to love and embrace and recognize myself as an individual. I think they're very much tied into the way in which I define my identity. But I think sometimes what is said about me or what people recognize about me, I allow myself to doubt or maybe feel that it's overcompensated or they're putting too much weight into it and I'm not as much of whatever they're saying about me. But I am working on using the lenses in which my loved ones see me to better see myself. And like you said, I do think it is hard to not allow the ways that other people see you to define how you see yourself. I think maybe we need to be better at picking and choosing whose lenses we allow ourselves to see through and to see ourselves and identify as. But I know that for me, my loved one's version of me is what allows me to further give myself and my identity recognition.
Oh, definitely. Like, it's hard to see the big picture when you're so involved in it. And, like if you're seeing yourself every day and, you perceive yourself through your own identity, like you perceive yourself through the lens of your identity every single day. So some days it's hard to recognize the gifts that you've chosen to imbue upon your identity and upon yourself, because you're so used to all of those gifts maybe being an everyday occurrence, as well as maybe you're used to highlighting the challenges of that identity, right? So when our loved ones weigh in, and we control like how much we allow that to impact us, hopefully. they can help us really keep sight of our gifts and the ways that we manage. I'll speak first about being an Asian American woman and specifically being a Filipino New Yorker.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Natalia and we met in Catholic school. That was for high school, but I've been in Catholic school since I was 4, since pre-K. Being like Filipino and being Catholic have been very much a part of my identity growing up. And you can't really go one without the other in a lot of circles, especially in my neighborhood. So I grew up with very proud Filipino American parents, like introducing me and keeping me with the culture through church and going to like Filipino stores and seeing all of our relatives and eating Filipino food. The only caveat being that they stopped speaking to me in Tagalog when I was 4. But that was because like they wanted me to have a better advantage at school because I hadn't learned English before. And guys, let me tell you, that's a myth. Like, don't stop teaching your kids in your family's native tongue. They will pick up English if they're in school. It'll be all the better for them if you keep if you keep practicing your native tongue with them. Yeah, that's actually something I'm a speech pathology grad student. That's something that we talk about a lot. Like, don't stop speaking to your child in their native tongue. Like, that's their heritage. That's part of their linguistic diversity. Keep it that way.
Right. And there's research that's out there that shows how the brain is wired differently when you are able to navigate yourself in multiple languages. So I think, especially for, immigrant parents or you're just coming to the country, you feel this need to assimilate and have good English, try to chase the American dream, and that you're going to be seen as less smart because you don't speak English. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, you probably have a better advantage of tackling academics if you are able to manage yourself in multiple languages because of the ways in which sentence structure happens. I remember in high school, I was terrible at French, and our French professor, teacher, she asked me if I was good at math. And I was good at math. And she told me that she was surprised that I was good at math because I couldn't get a handle on French. And they're pretty much the same thing. And I remember sitting in the class and being like, I don't necessarily see how that works. But as I got older and had to take languages in college, I took both Italian and Spanish. I understood that comment. Yeah, it made me uncomfortable when I was in high school, but I understood what she was saying. And having grown up with so many people who are bilingual, multilingual, or my partner who is a linguist himself, he loves languages, and him explaining to me how he has dived into languages and how he's able to hold conversations because of his understanding and love for language makes, a lot of sense of how it is very similar to math. So, don't rob your kids of being able to speak multiple languages because it will help them be able to just see the world and think in different ways than those who only speak one language can.
Yeah, totally. And that was one advantage that I didn't see when I was younger. Mm-hmm. The advantages of being from a non-monolingual background that I didn't learn until maybe even undergrad.
Right.
Because a lot of my childhood, even up until high school, was really with the aim of assimilating to the people around me, not being my own weird self and loving all of those things, but not being different enough that I felt like an outsider. Because, you want to watch the things that you want to watch, but you also want to have friends.
Yeah.
It was difficult in some ways. Not to say that I didn't have friends. I have a lot of memories from high school, and I wouldn't have been able to get through it without the people that I was with. But there were also the comments, and I fully believe that this was not out of anything truly malignant, that this was really from a place of ignorance. That I've heard comments that saying like, oh, like, Irene, you're not Filipino enough because you don't speak Tagalog, or you're not Asian enough because you're Filipino and you don't use chopsticks, or because you're darker, and that you're Filipino, you're a lesser Asian. Like, these are all things that I've heard. When you first hear some things like that from the people around you, you brush it off as like a joke. You think that, oh, it's a one-off comment. Oh, like they're just making a crack or something, and then you brush it off. But then it's like, I heard it quite a bit of times that people thought it was like a running joke sometime. And I'd be like, I didn't know that it was something to defend myself, to be, I hadn't really learned to take pride in my identity at the time among spheres that weren't Filipino Americans or weren't Asian Americans, because all the Filipino Americans that I knew kind of like kept to themselves, more just hung out with each other. I just didn't know how to navigate outside of that. And, we're forced into this place of being representatives of our cultures, which can be exhausting, but it's like a mantle we always carry. It's definitely a weight.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't until my senior year of college that like really those comments, like I really took it, I really like absorbed them and went, wait, like this sucks. Like people should not be speaking like this. This is not okay. Started learning to take pride in my identity, and that like being in this place of flux, like feeling like I was in the hyphen between Filipino and American. Being Filipino American was an okay place to be. Like I didn't have to choose one over the other, when so much of my childhood felt like I had to choose being more Filipino or being more American.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Again, as the last time you and I spoke, like I said, I really tried to suppress my years in high school.
Yeah.
But the Asian population that we did have, specifically in our class, wasn't very large, but if I remember correctly, all of the Asian women that were in our class were all Filipino.
Most of them. There were a few that in our grade, the ones that weren't were of mixed heritage, from what I knew. Which, they are Asian as well. I just not invalidating anybody's identity. Like, I don't know their experiences. I just know the other Filipinos in the class better in terms of the culture that we share.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was just remembering that because I know at least when we went and in our class specifically, when you look back at it, our class was relatively diverse, but the I would guess say the smallest population that we had was probably Asian, at least from what I remember. Again, like I said, I suppress it, but with what you were saying, being told that you're lesser Asian or you're not Filipino enough because you don't speak the language, especially like being darker, like you're not Asian because you're darker, or you're not this because you're darker. That's such it's such a situation that happens in all different kinds of communities. And I know that when I was in college, I joined an Asian sorority, an Asian interest sorority. And, I love the Asian culture, but I also joined that sorority because the women who were already a part of it before I went through the process of becoming a part of it were just people that I related to, in regards to how they carried themselves, in regards to the struggles and plights that they had, into the goals that they had. They were all very hardworking, go-getting. Though I could relate that way, I'm also not Asian. I do not have any Asian blood in me. I checked. I've done the ancestry DNA. It's the one thing I don't have. But I learned that there's like an Asian hierarchy, that it's like if I remember correctly, it's like the Japanese or Korean is like at the top, and then you have your Chinese, and then you kind of have everybody in between. But essentially the way the hierarchy works is that the darker Asian you are, the lower on the totem pole you are, essentially. And the term like jungle Asian has been thrown around a lot. Now, given you my sorority was extremely diverse, and in particular at the university that I went to, there were a lot of non-Asian but also Asian sisters that were there, and they were from all different kinds of Asian backgrounds, different languages, cultures. Some were adopted, and there were many different experiences that were put there. But being able to see that pretty much the same kind of conversations that happen in the Latino community or the Black community are also happening in the Asian community. This sense of colorism, this sense of you're not enough Black, you're not enough Latino if you don't speak the language, if you don't eat this, if you don't watch this. And, I very much grew up in that as someone who is mixed. I'm Italian, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican. And, I was raised by one sect of my family, but my neighborhood was a different sect of who I was and how I identified, and what made most sense to what I related to was something different. And I felt like in every community that I put myself in, I wasn't Puerto Rican enough, I wasn't Italian enough, I wasn't Dominican enough, I wasn't this enough, and I don't speak the language, and I don't eat this way, or I don't cook this way. And so I understand that feeling and that sense of like, well, I am these things, but how am I not enough of these things? And I really do believe that a lot of that sense of othering, the colorism, the not being enough, so you need to adopt X, Y, and Z, honestly boils down to colonialism, because the colonization of our peoples was driven by, you need to be X, Y, and Z in order for us to, I guess, cohabitate, if you want to put it, because there really wasn't much of cohabitation. But it was like, I'm going to use our religion and I'm going to use our education to make you more like us. And the more that you assimilate, the better you're going to be. And that has trickled down into the Asian, into the Latino, into the Black, and all of the other communities that have been colonized, this sense of otherism, and like, then you are enough if you do X, Y, and Z. And
like, for me, really, that hyphen between Filipino American is very necessary, because that hyphen is where I feel like I live, like, really not even in between, but like 100% of each.
Yes.
I feel privileged in that way now. Like, I very much am a product of a New York upbringing, and very much a product of a Filipino American upbringing. I've had, the unique experiences of going to Flushing on Friday, not only growing up with Filipino food, but also of eating Vietnamese food since I was a baby, basically. So I feel like nowadays I feel blessed that I have such a colorful background, because it really contributes to what makes us unique, right? And that's something that you kind of have to learn to utilize all of these things and be like, okay, so how do I make this all of these shards like one cohesive picture for myself that makes sense for me, so that I can kind of project this for both myself and, I guess, to the world. Like, going back to colorism, that is definitely like at the heart of the conflict for me. Especially as, like, I would say the loudest Asian, like, or the most outspoken Asian in our class, like, or maybe not outspoken, the most extroverted. I also felt both the positive aspects of that and sometimes the negative ones. Yeah.
I see that.
So, like, other than those Asian comments, I would also hear things like, Irene, nobody cares what you're talking about because you're talking a lot.
I do remember that. I do remember that you were very much digested differently than a lot of the students in our class. So I do remember that.
So, of course, those comments hurt too. And, like, I remember, I think going through college, that was something that I became conscientious of, but really during college is where I feel like I flourished, because I met very like-minded people, and that those things that maybe like stopped me from assimilating really helped me shine. And the people that I made friends with in college really, like, they wanted me to succeed, like, and like make all these friends and stuff, but also like never curbed who I was, and like we all embraced like how weird we are. And we're still friends to this day.
That's good.
And all of us also felt that way in terms of our Asian identity too, in this place of conflict. So it was something that was a frequent point of discussion, not even just among like Filipino Americans, but like my friends are Korean American, Chinese American, like all other types of Asian as well, but most of them come down to those three. Really, like, working through it in like an informal setting as well as class really helped. After I graduated college, I feel like I got more comfortable being Filipino American with all of the benefits, I wouldn't say benefits, but all of the things that I could highlight in my life because of that identity, as well as all of the challenges because of that. I actually moved to South Korea, whole other side of Asian identity. and how different it was from being Filipino American. But it kind of felt like this free place to explore that side where the only times it was kind of acceptable to kind of rep the Filipino aspect of my identity was in digestible measures that were acceptable to non-Asians. So for example, like in high school or in college, that would be through the lens of food. Like that was the best way for me to introduce and explore my identity and gain acceptance for that. You know, you'd have someone try something which made to them look foreign or quote unquote weird, but then they try it and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And in a way, therefore, you felt like or for me, myself, like my identity felt more valid. Like I remember in high school, we made my mom made these Filipino spring rolls called turon. And I think it was like for some sort of like cultural food day. So we were like all in the cafeteria and people brought all kinds of food. And I brought like a good amount of this food. And a lot of people came up to me asking for seconds who'd never tried it. So that felt probably one of the proudest that I felt of my cultural identity in high school. And that also carried on through college. But the good thing is in college, it was just more diverse because I went to a public university. It was my first time not only meeting like, honestly, like non-Christians, because going to Catholic school, like for all 12 years, like you don't really meet too many people that aren't Christian. After high school is our first time like seeing boys. So that was something too. But just like, you just have all of these different identities in this place that really like you're allowed to explore, that it's not like a culture of assimilation. So it was just easier to explore my identity there. But I really feel like I was really free to explore my cultural identity when I was in Asia. Like I got to indulge in all of the pop culture things that I loved during high school and elementary school, like K-pop, going to karaoke, eating Korean food, even finding Filipino restaurants, going to Japan. When I came back, it was nice because I kind of had this place of no judgment, you know, where I just didn't feel like a non-Asian perspective on my identity kind of enforcing how I explored my identity without judgment of being like, oh, that's not appropriate or, oh, that's not cool. I felt like I really came of age in Asia. And not only because of that exploration stuff, when I got off the plane 6 months after graduating from undergrad, I was in charge of 300 students. So I really became an adult while I was there. Yeah. And when I came back, awesome. It felt like a superhero montage where I just came back and I was like, suddenly I felt like Captain America.
I think I had definitely had a completely opposite experience. So I went to a private Catholic university. I didn't go to Catholic school all my life. I went to public school from kindergarten to 5th grade. And we had a very mixed bag of students, but I would say there was a good majority of students that were Muslim. So I was very much used to growing up with like different kinds of religions and my school recognizing multiple holidays. So I knew what Ramadan was. I knew what Passover was. Outside of just like Christmas and Easter. And so I was already privy to that, but particularly for college, I have never attended a school where people were, or the majority of the people were upper middle class or upper class and were fully white. And that was a different experience for me because the university that I went to is like 98% white and like the average household income is like $120,000. And no one I really went to school with or grew up with, or at least the majority of the people that were in those spaces was coming from that kind of background or could identify with that kind of reality. So when I was thrusted into that in college, I had even more of an identity crisis because I very much grew up as like being deemed the like blanquita, the like white Latina girl. Though I grew up in a household of like being told, no, we're not like white people. We're not white. Technically, racially, we are white. And then going to an institution that is a predominantly white institution and being told I wasn't white, but then like not being fully Latino enough to 100% vibe with the very small Latino community that was there. It really threw me for a whirlspin. My freshman year was super hard, just trying to to find a space to be accepted and to be myself. And I'm very thankful that I found my sorority, because that it was just a bunch of us who didn't fit in anywhere else. Now, given the largest quote unquote minority, I hate using that word, but the largest people of color population that was at the university that I went to was Asian. The majority of them were Korean. But even for the women that I was in the sorority with, they felt that they themselves didn't fit into the Asian communities that were created on our campus. So, we had like the Korean Student Society or the Asian Student Society. And yeah, they were a part of those things, but they didn't necessarily feel like they fit into that. And our sorority was kind of that one saving grace that was a bit more accepting to kind of just everybody. And again, even though it was Asian interest, we had all different kinds of people that were in our respective charter. I also studied abroad when I was in college, and I went to Costa Rica, which is a part of Latin America. And it was another situation of like, well, I really don't speak the language, and I sort of kind of understand the culture. And like Latinos, they're extremely religious. They're very Catholic. And yes, I was raised a Roman Catholic, but I don't come from a religious family. So there were just a lot of social cues and expectations and I guess cultural barriers that I was not raised in. So again, even though I was like, I'm with my Latino people, I also didn't necessarily feel fully comfortable in that space. And it took a really long time, probably up until recently, really, and I'm almost 30. So it took a really long time for me to accept my complexities, that I am all of these things, but I am not what I guess like the over defining definition, how society defines some of these labels. I don't necessarily fit those labels. And I'm have pushed myself more and more to really evaluate the labels and identities that I say that I'm a part of, because when I look at it, I have to ask if they really do fit who I am and the kind of complex human being and complex identity that I do have. Like, do I feel fully comfortable calling myself these labels and using titles if I don't fully relate to the definition that is constantly put out there by the media, which creates expectations of who and how I'm supposed to be. So I love that you had this like coming to age moment, this like ability to like fully accept yourself and be yourself and love yourself at an earlier point. I'm at a pivotal point as well, especially coming straight out of college. I think we all got into this weird limbo of like, what are we supposed to do? And but you had this like moment for yourself to validate, your existence and come to this place of accepting and, like you said, feeling like Captain America, feeling like a superhero. Like, I think that's such an amazing moment, and I'm so
Thank you. And honestly, like
that.
I guess leading into the second facet of my identity, I mean, out of the many, but like the second major one is when I got diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a type of bone cancer, last year. So it's been a little over a year. I got diagnosed last Valentine's Day. So yay, happy Valentine's Day for me. I got a tumor.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so of course that was devastating, and I'm not at all making light of it because that was super difficult, would not do again, 0 out of 5 stars on Yelp, would not go back to that institution. I would go back to Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is my cancer center, which is an amazing place,
They're
5
awesome.
out of 5 stars, the best place I never wanted to be at. Through all of my cancer treatment, and I'll go into what that entails in a little bit, but really what helped me power through all of that is all of these moments, all of these embracing moments that I've made for myself, both like throughout my life, but especially in Korea. Though I embrace those moments as moments of strength and independence, and kind of as an echo of a promise to return back to that, or, like come out of those ashes and these ones as well. But those experiences being as much a part of who I am and who I'm forged to be now. Yeah. So for example, just going into my treatment a little bit. So osteosarcoma, like I said, is a bone cancer. So essentially I think it was like 5 by 8 by 11 centimeter tumor of the lower part of my femur, which is the part of your bone, a part of your thigh that's attached to your knee. So it was in that junction between my lower thigh and my knee inside the bone where there was a tumor growing for apparently quite a few years, because I had been experiencing some pain in that, like, I would go hiking one day and then I'd need 3 days off because I could barely bend my leg. And honestly, this had been going on for years, and I put it off as I at the time I would go to the gym and do like use a squat rack, do like weighted squats and like the leg press and all of those exercises. And I thought maybe it's a result of improper form. And finally, after a few years of like trying to do PT and a bunch of other things, like all of those weren't working. So I finally went to an orthopedic surgeon who told me like, oh, this is most likely a meniscus tear. So like a tear in my kneecap that we have to get fixed soon, but it's a quick procedure. We need to just get an MRI to confirm that it's a meniscus tear, and if it is, like, how big it is. So on January 28th, 2020, the second day of my second semester of grad school, so, you know, like, really excited to start grad school for the second semester, I go in at 8:30 in the morning for my MRI, you know, listen to some Hamilton while I'm in there, don't really worry about it. Leave after 30 minutes, go to class, 5:30 p.m. the same day in the middle of my last class of the day, I had 3 missed calls from the orthopedic surgeon. And then so I was already bored of the class a little. We were just going over the syllabus. So I stepped out into the hall, into the stairwell, called back my doctor. And that's when my doctor told me, like, I don't know how to say this, but it turns out you have a tumor that's been growing inside of your leg. You know, I was having a good day. And then what do you do with that information? So, of course, I couldn't go back into class. I just felt invaded, you know?
Yeah. But some people feel obligated to, or like will do that to distract themselves. So I'm happy that you paused.
Thank you. Yeah. Like, it was very difficult. And I just felt invaded, you know, like how is this thing in me? And it was just at a complete dissonance of my experience, you know. Otherwise, I felt healthy. Like, just a few months back, like, I was in Hawaii for about a month and I went on 10 hikes in a week, right? Like, doing things like that. And then when I was starting to experience that leg pain that led me to the MRI, like, in that instance, I was in North Carolina, like, playing with my nieces and nephews, you know, like, bouncing them on my knee, giving piggyback rides, all of those things, running around. To like literally 2 days after coming back from North Carolina, finding out that I have a tumor. And, you know, on top of that, my doctor saying like, we don't know if it's benign or cancerous, but it's looking abnormal. And I'm, as tough as that conversation is, like, I would rather have that kind of doctor than one that sugarcoats it and like leaves me hoping. I would rather process all the hard stuff in one go, in a way, than in digestible bites like that. So I was, you know, on that stairwell crying and even considering not telling my parents that I could do this by myself, because my parents are super overprotective. I'm an only child. And I was just so used to doing so many things on my own, like, you know, deal with these problems and then tell my parents if it's like, once I've succeeded or if it's really out of my hands. But of course, like, that idea immediately, I tossed it out of the window 5 minutes later, called my parents, told them what happened. They were shocked, but they were a lot calmer than I was. I think because we didn't know yet the kind of tumor it was, or they didn't fully understand what it meant, and like they didn't process it. So I texted a friend. My friend brought out my school stuff, stayed with me till almost the end of class. Like, I went to another doctor like the next day, because as soon as I spoke with that orthopedic surgeon, he already gave me referrals to oncologists, cancer doctors, to follow up and, you know, start the process. So that entire month, like February up until the beginning of March, it was full of appointments. Literally, that was a Tuesday when I found that I had a tumor. By that same Thursday, I had an appointment with an orthopedic surgeon, and we were planning my biopsy. And then, like, pretty much 4 or 5 days out of the week, every week until the beginning of March, I was in some sort of testing. If it's like a PET CT scan, another MRI, my biopsy, consultations for all of those things, education. February 14th, Valentine's Day, is when I found out that it was cancerous and that it was osteosarcoma. And that was, of course, really shocking, because that's really when it sets in, like, okay, this is definitely going to be a tough road. Because if the tumor turned out to be benign, then the treatment plan really is just have a surgery and remove the tumor and pretty much heal, and that's that, right? So that would maybe take a month or two off, maybe 3 months at the most off of school, like go back to school, be able to be recovered and whatnot. But the tougher road with cancer treatment is I need something called neoadjuvant therapy, meaning that treatment for osteosarcoma lasts typically 9 months. Let's say each month is about a cycle. So there are about 6 weeks in the cancer cycle. So I needed to do 6 cycles of chemotherapy. So that's 36 weeks of chemotherapy on top of a surgery that I needed to have that would remove that lower part of my femur, as well as have a complete knee replacement. So I went through 4 cycles. So that's 24 weeks of chemotherapy. And then I had my surgery rested for maybe 6 weeks at home, not being able to move because they basically restructured my leg. The thing that I'm most thankful for is that, like, I kept sensation in my ankle and my foot, so I could, like, move down. Like, it didn't feel like a complete limb loss at all. So that really helped keep my sanity for that. And then after 6 weeks, I went back into chemotherapy. I finished that chemo in November, at the end of this past November. And I've been on what's called maintenance therapy. So it's a non-chemo medication, but I still have an infusion every week now. It used to be twice a week, but now it's every week until the end of this June. To top that all off, the week that I started treatment was the week that quarantine started. Being in a hospital and, now, like, one of the highlights, I guess, that I'll take from this is that I was treated in the pediatric unit, even as a 26-year-old, because osteosarcoma is typically discovered in, like, adolescents. So pediatric oncologists are typically the ones who see osteosarcoma patients. So because I was treated in that unit, I was able to have a caregiver with me. So my mom was typically with me, I would say, like, 98% of the time. And I was there 12 hours a day, 4 days a week. Chemotherapy is no walk in the park, guys. Like, what chemo really is, is the logic is it kills the cancer cells in your body, but it's not like it says this is a cancer cell and this isn't, so we're not going to kill the one that isn't cancer cell. It's pretty indiscriminate. It makes you have a low-grade fever a week later because basically all of your blood counts are dropped and you have, like, no fighters left in your body. So you're extremely susceptible to infection and your body just immediately goes into a fever state, like a red alert. Every single cycle of chemo, I would be in the inpatient hospitalized for maybe 5 days every month, basically, outside of, being in the hospital already in outpatient 12 hours a day. Like, this is pretty gruesome, but, like, that's the reality.
No, listen, Irene, I really appreciate you being as in detail as you are being. I appreciate you revisiting this because I am more than sure that it was traumatic as hell, because it sounds exhausting. And I mean, just listening to this and knowing where you are now and the things that you have continued to do throughout your life, despite all of the, as you put it, very invasive process that you have gone through is amazing. Like, you are such a strong individual, not only physically, but emotionally. And I appreciate you going into this detail. I appreciate you telling your story.
I just want people to understand really how tough it is, especially in the unique perspective of being a young adult going through this, just for people to understand how tough it is and how exhausting it is. But also, unfortunately, how normal I felt about it. If I had to go through this for a year, like, I would have to go to the hospital every Monday through Thursday at 7 a.m. for a year, passing out because of the meds going through me, not feeling great, being nauseous, and, like, all of these things just became normal. Again, it's not something that I chose to be a cancer patient. I don't think anybody can ever say that. Like, and it's something that really is thrust on the person going through it. But I learned myself the ways in which to take this identity and make it my own, instead of feeling like this victim of it. And I definitely, I wouldn't say even victim because I'm still here, thank God. But, you know, being a cancer patient and trying to see the strengths that I forged through this identity. So, you know, it does become a little tedious from time to time. And I do like hearing the words like, you're strong and you're brave, just because you hear it over and over again. And when you're going through something like this, you sometimes forget what that means. Yeah. Because, you know, like I'm throwing up or something or feeling like crap and someone says you're so strong. And I'm just like, I'm throwing up right now. Like, I don't know what you mean. Something that I really did embrace is how many people told me like, it's remarkable how positive you stayed. You're smiling, that you're finding something to embrace, that you're still joyful of, and that you have such a positive outlook. So that one feels a little more specific to me and something that I've really taken as something that I forged. And not only that, something I've retained, because I have always believed like, you know, I always feel like I've been a positive person growing up, but going through these kind of challenges makes me see how conscious of a choice that is. That's something that I've really kept close to my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was a part of you without you even thinking, but that part of you existed for a reason and got you through what you have been going through this, you know, this past year. So even though, you know, you were Irene and positive, like your existence and how you existed,
definitely the second
was
part,
all
especially
for a reason.
You
like
know,
that was
like the way that I perceive myself and I have my cancer treatment being perceived, at least through my own lens, is something that I feel like has been somewhat deliberate, so that I can control my story in a way. Like, not to say that I'm like leaving out any details or anything. I want people to understand all of these things, because this experience that I've gone through, while personal and unique, is universal. Same thing with like identity. Like, one of the best gifts that I've received in exploring my identity as an Asian American is the universal struggle that I've heard from other people as well in dictating their own identity. That's felt like, okay, so things can feel this crappy. This isn't unique, but I'm glad that I'm not the only one. So I feel like the same thing with cancer treatment, in that I like telling people about what's been going on, because I just want them to understand that if they were in this position, or someone, you know, in some way related to this type of challenge, that they know someone who's gone through it and like can help them not feel like they're isolated. In that way, like I started this group called Cozy Cancer Corner on Facebook to help other young adult cancer patients, because I was being treated in pediatrics, and I continue to be treated in pediatrics, which means the majority of the people I come in contact with are either babies, are the nurses and doctors, you know. There's like really no in between there. I managed to make friends through, at MSK Memorial Sloan Kettering, we have a teen and young adult app, and connecting with people there. But then like we realized like Facebook is just more organic for people in our generation. So I started a group there. And basically we provide a space where we have monthly social events where we just like hang out and talk about how our month has been, talk about whatever we want to talk about with people who understand that facet of our life. But also we have a group chat where people can just text 24/7 whenever they want. Let's say if someone's just in treatment and like waiting for the doctor to come in and has nobody to talk to, they can just message in the group. And I really wanted to help forge that community space so that people don't feel isolated, especially like I definitely have felt isolated, not through my identity as much as physically with the quarantine. I felt like being a community builder has been necessary for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if I can think of anybody that's going to be a great community builder that I remember from high school, you definitely be one. And a lot of that I would say is attributed to the positivity that you had and the versatility that you had. at least from what I remember you and how I experienced you, because given I really only experienced you in high school, which was 4 years, and then via Instagram, but you very much kind of wear all of your interests and all of the parts of who you are kind of on your sleeve. And, you know, whether or not you do that intentionally or not intentionally is something that I don't personally know, but you make people comfortable because you're maybe not afraid or open to kind of putting all these different parts of you out there, and showing that that's okay. And a part of, you know, being a leader and being a community organizer is your ability to A, know yourself, B, listen, and C, to connect. And I think from again, how I have experienced you, you very much have always had those attributes as a part
thank you.
of
I appreciate
who
that.
you were and how you held yourself.
That's a pretty good summation of my MO, I guess, my motivations to facilitate communities of inclusiveness within the spaces that I walk. Same thing with the Asian American community. I helped prior to my cancer treatment. I was working with this group for basically creating events for Asian Americans living in New York City, just hoping that people feel welcome, just under the banner of, if this is the identity that you feel innately, like if you're an Asian American, even if you don't speak your native tongue, or you don't eat with chopsticks, or whatever stereotype or quote unquote guideline there is to being Asian, like, you're just, the fact that you exist is enough to be a part of this group and explore that. Same thing with cancer patient, like you're not born into this, but it happened. For some people they were, unfortunately, but like for all the people it was thrust upon them in some sort of way. And this is a space to find joy despite, and also have a space because.
I think that's a great way of putting it. The space despite and because, like it has to balance itself out. And I think when it comes to just identity and what you associate yourself with, or sometimes what you choose not to associate yourself with, it's because you don't want to be seen or see yourself as a victim to certain things. But I believe all identities have pros and cons to them. And you just have to allow them to weigh themselves out within you. So I am this despite of this, but also because of this, and accept it for what it is. And you don't necessarily have to be a victim of the situation, but, you know, take pride in your existence.
Because you're here. That's the other side of it. Just because you're here.
You are now listening to You Heard.